This is a work of pure cinematic fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are wholly invented and bear no resemblance to real persons or actual events. Her uncle shoved her through the door like she was a piece of luggage he was tired of carrying. That was the moment Elena Vera understood what she was worth to her family: exactly nothing. She had dressed carefully that night because some part of her still believed that if she looked composed, she could hold herself together. Black dress, borrowed, hair pinned back, hands steadying each other behind her back where no one could see them shake. She had told herself on the drive over that she would not cry in front of these people, whoever they were. She had told herself that this was a mistake, that her uncle would fix it, that there had to be another way. Then Marco Vera had grabbed her elbow in the rain and pushed her through the front doors of the Valerio estate, and she had understood that there was no other way. She was the other way. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who see you as a transaction, you already know what Elena felt in that first second. And if you've never had someone you loved hand you over to settle a debt, then press that like button. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because this story is about to go somewhere that will stay with you long after it ends. She stood in the center of a marble foyer that smelled like leather and cold air, and she did not look at the floor, because the floor was the only thing she felt like she deserved right now, and she refused to give herself that. 3 men in the room. There were 3 men in the room. 2 of them recognized, big, quiet, standing near the walls like furniture that could kill you. The third was seated behind a desk that probably cost more than her family's entire apartment in Bridgeport. He had a contract in front of him, a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the kind of face that doesn't give you anything for free. Dante Valerio didn't look like a monster. That was the first thing that confused her. She had built him into something over the drive here, something with edges, something that matched what she'd been handed to. Instead, he was somewhere north of 40, dark-haired, wearing a gray dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was looking at her the same way you'd look at something that didn't belong in the room. Not hungry, not cruel, just careful. Marco stepped forward and cleared his throat. "She's here as agreed." Dante still hadn't said anything. "The full amount was negotiated," Marco said. His voice had that particular register of a man trying to sound confident when he is completely terrified. 32,000, and the girl. That closes everything. Elena felt the words hit her sternum like a fist. The girl. 3 years she'd been paying off loans, skipping meals, working double shifts at the hospital supply company downtown, and this was the sentence her uncle used to describe her contribution. The girl. Dante looked at the contract. He picked it up with one hand, scanned it for maybe 4 seconds, and then he tore it in half, clean down the middle. He set both pieces on the desk and looked at Elena directly for the first time. "You're not a debt," he said, "and you're not property. You can sit down." Marco started talking immediately. "Mr. Valerio, the terms are void." Dante's voice didn't rise. Didn't have to. Sit down or leave. Either way, stop talking. Marco, shut up. Elena didn't sit. She stood exactly where she was and looked at Dante Valerio across the desk and tried to figure out what the angle was, because there was always an angle. Men like this didn't tear up contracts out of principle. Men like this didn't do anything that didn't serve them first. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "Right now? Nothing." He nodded toward a chair along the wall. "You can sit there while I speak to your uncle, or you can wait in the hallway. Either way, you're not leaving this house tonight, not because I'm keeping you, but because it's raining, and I'm not putting anyone on the road at midnight." It was such a mundane thing to say that it took her a moment to process it, not because he was dangerous, because it was raining. She sat down. Marco looked at her like she had just done something wrong. She looked back at him until he looked away. The conversation between Dante and Marco lasted 11 minutes. Elena counted the seconds against the pulse in her throat. She couldn't hear most of it because they moved to a side room and closed the door, but she heard tone her uncle's voice, climbing and dropping and climbing again, and Dante's voice staying at exactly the same flat register the entire time. Like someone explaining something complicated to someone who wasn't going to understand it anyway. One of the 2 men near the wall brought her a glass of water without being asked. She stared at it for a minute before she drank it, because her mother had raised her not to accept things from people she didn't trust, and because drinking the water felt like agreeing to something she hadn't read yet. She drank it anyway. She was thirsty. When the door opened again, Marco came out first. His face was a mess, not bruised, just rearranged. He looked like someone who had expected a fight and gotten something worse, which was civility. Elena. He crossed the room toward her. You should go, Dante said from behind him. He wasn't looking at Marco. He was looking at the two papers still sitting on his desk. Your car is outside. Someone will walk you out. This isn't Marco started. Finished. The word wasn't loud, but it closed every door in the room at the same time. One of the wall men materialized at Marco's elbow and steered him toward the front entrance. Marco turned back. Once Elena looked at him. She had spent 27 years looking at this man at family dinners, at her father's funeral, at the tables where they played cards and told each other they were going to be fine. She had looked at him 1,000 times. She looked at him now and understood for the first time that she'd never actually seen him. He left. The front door shut. The sound of rain came back. You're a nurse? Dante asked. He'd moved to the window. He wasn't looking at her when he asked it. Medical supply coordinator, Elena said. I'm not a nurse. But you work at a hospital. For a company that supplies hospitals. Yes. He nodded slowly, like he was filing it somewhere. It bothered her, the way he absorbed information without reacting to it. Couldn't read him, and that made the space between them feel unstable. How much did they tell you? He asked. That the family owed money, that the amount had gotten complicated, that Marco had worked out an arrangement. She paused. They didn't exactly describe the arrangement. Dante turned from the window. In the low light, she could see something in his face that she couldn't name. Not guilt, not quite pity, something older than both. Your uncle told you this was voluntary, he said. It wasn't a question. Elena's jaw tightened. He told me I was coming to discuss options. He told me there was paperwork. There was paperwork. I didn't know what the paperwork was. A silence opened between them. Dante looked at her for a long moment. She held eye contact because she wasn't going to be the one who blinked first in this particular conversation. All right, he said finally. He went back to his desk and sat down. He didn't look at the torn contract. There's a room on the second floor. It's clean. It's clean. You'll stay there tonight and tomorrow morning we'll figure out what you actually want to do. What I want to do, Elena repeated. Yes, I want to go home. Your family's apartment is under surveillance. Not by me. He said it simply, like he was pointing out that the weather was bad. Until I know who placed it and why, it's not safe. So, second floor, she stood there for a moment, trying to find the crack in it, the hidden clause, the thing underneath the thing. She couldn't find it. I don't understand you, she said. You don't need to, Dante said. You just need to sleep. She didn't sleep. The room was what he'd said, clean, a window overlooking a dark garden furniture that was expensive without trying to prove it. There was a lamp on the nightstand and a phone charger still in its packaging, which told her either the room was rarely used or someone had put it there tonight. And she didn't want to think about which one that was. She lay on top of the covers in her black dress because taking it off felt like deciding to stay, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to rain hitting the glass and thought about her father. Victor Vera had died 8 years ago. A car accident outside Gary, Indiana, that was what they'd been told. Ice on the road, a truck that crossed the median, a phone call at 2 in the morning from a hospital she'd never been to before and never went back to. She had been 19. Her mother had been a person before that phone call and something quieter after it. She had never questioned the story. She hadn't had the energy to question anything back then, and by the time she had energy again, there didn't seem to be anything left to question. She thought about that now, in the dark, because something about the way Dante Valerio had looked at her in that foyer was bothering her. Not the way you look at someone you own. Not the way you look at a stranger. The way you look at someone you recognize. She turned that over for a long time before her body finally gave out and dragged her under. Morning came gray and damp. She woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, not menacing. Just the ordinary sounds of a house with people in it. Someone speaking in low Italian 2 rooms away. A door closing somewhere below. She found a change of clothes folded on the chair, a gray sweater. Dark jeans, both new, tags still on. Her size, or close enough. She stared at them for a moment and then put them on, because her black dress was starting to feel like a uniform for a role she was done playing. Downstairs, the kitchen was occupied by a man she hadn't seen the night before, stocky, mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of hands that had done manual labor at some point, though that time was clearly past. He was making eggs. He did not look up when she came in. "Coffee's there," he said. "Sit wherever." She sat at the long table and wrapped her hands around a mug and looked out the window at the garden, which in daylight turned out to be large, formally planted, and badly in need of attention at the back corner, where the hedges had started losing the argument with gravity. The man put a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast, a few slices of tomato. She looked up. "I'm Leo," he said. "I've worked for Dante for 15 years. You don't need to worry about me. I wasn't worried about you specifically." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Smart girl. Eat. She ate. She was hungry, and hunger was a problem she could actually solve, unlike everything else currently in her life. Dante came in 20 minutes later. He had changed from the night before: dark trousers, a dark jacket, a coffee cup already in hand that suggested he'd been up for hours. He sat across the table from her and didn't open a conversation immediately, which she found she didn't hate. "Did you sleep?" he asked eventually. "Some." He nodded. "I have some things to tell you. You can decide how you want to respond to them." She set her fork down. "Okay." He looked at his coffee cup for a second like he was choosing a door. Then he looked at her. "Your uncle's debt," he said, "was not $32,000. Elena kept her face level. "How much was it?" "At the original amount? $4,300. The number was inflated after the fact." He said it without any particular emotion. Someone adjusted the ledger. The room was very quiet. Leo had apparently found somewhere else to be. "Inflated," Elena said. "To what amount?" "Enough that Marco couldn't pay it," which was the point. She felt the floor shift under her metaphorically, but in the particular way that real shifts feel physical first. Her mouth went dry. Someone wanted the debt to be unpayable. "Yes, so that Marco would..." She swallowed. "So that he would offer me." Dante didn't say anything, which was its own answer. Pushed her plate back an inch. Not dramatically. Just enough to put space between herself and the ordinary morning thing that was happening in the middle of an extraordinary situation. She needed something to do with her hands, and there wasn't anything. "Why?" she asked. "Why would anyone want me delivered here?" Dante looked at her with that expression she still couldn't fully classify. There was something careful in it. Something that had been sinned. Something that had been sitting with a difficult decision for a while. "That's the part I'm still working out," he said. "But I have a theory." "Tell me." He set his coffee down. "Your father's name was Victor Vieira." It hit her the way that names do when they come out of unexpected mouths, with a kind of wrongness. Like hearing your childhood nickname from someone who shouldn't know it. "Yes," she said. "Victor worked in financial operations." He said it quietly. "Not for a hospital supply company. Not for a bank." He paused. "He worked for this organization. For 9 years, he managed a portion of the Marchetti Syndicate's accounting network, the part that interfaced with our books." Kitchen felt very small suddenly. The window with the garden felt very far. "My father," Elena said slowly, "was an accountant for a public insurance firm." "I know that's what you were told. That's what he was." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "I grew up with him. I knew him. You knew the version of him he let you know." Dante said it without cruelty, which was almost worse. He was also something else. And in his last year, he found something inside the organization's books that frightened him badly enough that he copied records and tried to get them out. Elena stared at him. She was thinking about her father at the kitchen table, working late on his laptop, telling her he was catching up on quarterly reports. She was thinking about the way he'd sometimes go quiet in the middle of dinner, staring at nothing, until someone said his name. "What did he find?" she asked. "Evidence of a traitor," Dante said. "Someone inside this organization who has been manipulating financial records across multiple families for years, moving money, creating leverage, engineering conflicts. Someone we've been trying to identify for a long time." He looked at her directly. Victor called this person the architect. The name landed in the room and sat there. "Your father died before he could deliver what he'd found," Dante continued. The accident, I don't believe it was an accident. I've believed that for years. But the records he copied were never recovered, which means they're either destroyed or they're somewhere no one thought to look. Elena's hands were flat on the table. She looked at them. She made herself breathe. And you think I have them, she said. I think you might have them without knowing it. He leaned forward slightly. He would have hidden something for you. Victor was careful. He wouldn't have left without making sure there was a thread you could eventually follow. She thought about the battered suitcase she'd carried through the front door last night. She thought about what was in it. Mostly clothes, toiletries, her laptop, and at the very bottom, tucked under a cardigan that had been her mother's, a small leather notebook that Victor had given her the Christmas before he died. He'd said she should write in it. She never had. She'd kept it because it was his. She hadn't opened it in 3 years. I need to see my suitcase, she said. It was in the front closet where Leo had put it. Carried it to the sitting room off the foyer and set it on the floor and unzipped it, on Sadat in the doorway, not hovering, which she appreciated more than she could explain. She worked down through the layers: clothes, her laptop case, small toiletry bag with the broken zipper pull she kept meaning to replace, cardigan, and under the cardigan, the notebook. It was small, maybe 4 inches by 6, covered in dark green leather that had dried and cracked slightly at the corners. Her name was on the inside cover in her father's handwriting, along with a date, Christmas, 14 years ago. She'd been 13. She hadn't opened it since she was 23, and crying, and looking for something to hold on to. She opened it now. Most pages were blank, the way journals given to people who don't journal always are. But near the back, past the empty pages, there were 7 pages in her father's hand. She didn't know when he'd written them. She hadn't gotten that far the last time. She turned to the first one. It wasn't text. It was a symbol drawn in pen, slightly uneven, like something he'd copied from somewhere else. Small geometric mark. 3 lines converging at a point, with a horizontal bar bisecting the center angle. Stared at it. Then she looked up at Dante. "Can you come here?" she said. Across the room, he looked at the notebook. The change in his face was small, but it was real. A slight sharpening around the eyes. A stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. "Where did you get this?" he said. "My father gave me this notebook when I was 13. He said write in it." She turned it toward him. "I never did." But he apparently did. Dante reached up slowly, like he was handling something that could break, and turned the collar of his jacket aside. Just slightly. Just enough for her to see the edge of a scar below his left shoulder. The shape of it. 3 lines converging at a point. A horizontal bar through the center. Elena's breath left her. "What is that?" she whispered. Dante pulled the jacket back into place. He looked at the notebook, and then at her. Something had broken open in his expression, not all the way, but enough. Like a crack in stone letting light through. "It's the old seal," he said. "The Marchetti founding mark. Used by the original members before the organization changed hands." He paused. "Your father had this too?" "He drew it," she said, "in a notebook he gave to me. In the back pages I never read." They looked at each other across the narrow space of the sitting room, and Elena felt the entire ground of what she thought she knew shifting underneath her, slow and inexorable, the way earthquakes feel before you realize what they are. "He knew you," she said. It wasn't entirely a question. Dante's jaw moved. "Yes, you knew my father, yes." "How?" He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding. Something could literally watch the decision moving through him the way heavy things move through water. "Victor was one of the few men in this organization I trusted," he said. "When he came to me and said he'd found something wrong in the books, I believed him. I told him to document everything and come back. 2 weeks later, he stopped. His voice had changed. Not broken, but changed. 2 weeks later, his car went off the road outside Gary. The kitchen sounds were still going somewhere in the house. Someone's shoes on a staircase. The distant sound of a city doing its ordinary work beyond the walls. You tried to protect him, Elena said. I failed. She looked down at the notebook in her hands. At her father's handwriting in the margins of the pages she'd turned to. At the symbol he'd drawn, careful and deliberate, as if he'd wanted someone to find it eventually. As if he'd wanted her to find it. The pages, she said. There are 7 of them. After the symbol. She turned to the next one. Numbers. Columns of them account numbers, she thought, though she wasn't sure how she knew that. Strings of digits arranged in patterns that her father's hand had made careful and legible. More symbols throughout, and at the bottom of the 3rd page, a name. Not the architect, a real name. She hadn't expected it, and she didn't know it. Fact that it existed, that her father had written a name into a notebook and given it to his 13-year-old daughter to keep safe, without telling her what it was landed on her, with a weight she could feel in her teeth. She showed Dante the page. He read the name. He went very still. That's not possible, he said quietly. Is it someone you know? He looked up at her. In his eyes, for the first time since she'd walked through his front door, Elena saw something that looked like fear. Not of her, of what the name meant. That's someone who works for me, he said. Outside through the sitting room window, Elena saw a car she didn't recognize pulling slowly past the estate gate. Didn't stop. It didn't need to. 3 seconds later, Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face closed like a shutter. Get away from the window, he said. She moved. The first gunshot hit the exterior wall 4 seconds later. The first shot took out the sitting room window. Not a clean punch through glass. It blew the entire lower pane inward, and Elena felt the pressure change before she heard the sound. A hot displacement of air that slapped her left cheek as she dropped behind the heavy upholstered chair. Dante had already overturned with one hand. He moved fast for a man his size. Not panicked, just fast. The way people are fast when they've done this before and survived it. Stay low, he said. He wasn't yelling. He was using the voice people use when yelling would cost them something they can't afford. Elena stayed low. She had the notebook in both hands without thinking about it, clutched to her chest like it was something alive. The second shot hit higher, somewhere in the wall above the fireplace, and plaster dust sifted down onto the back of Dante's jacket. He had his phone out. He was texting with one hand and keeping his body between her and the window with the other, which she noticed and didn't say anything about. Voices from the hallway. 2 of them the men from the night before, moving through the house, in a way that suggested they had done this before too. Not running, coordinated, like a system turning itself on. How many? Dante said toward the door. One of the men appeared at the threshold. Late 30s, angular jaw, a scar that ran from his left ear toward his chin. He had a weapon in his hand and the look of someone who was angry about having to be here at this hour. 2 vehicles, east side outside the gate. 3rd position unknown, could be back garden. Raphael? Not on site. Nobody's reached him. Something moved across Dante's face too quickly for Elena to name it. He put his phone in his jacket pocket and looked at her. Can you move without freezing up on me? Yes. She meant it. She wasn't sure she meant it, but she said it like she did, which had gotten her through enough bad moments in life to be a reliable strategy. Then, come with me. They moved through the house in a crouch, through the hallway off the sitting room, through a door that led to what turned out to be a back corridor she hadn't known existed. The floors were stone back here, not marble, and colder and darker. Service passage, maybe the kind that old houses had when they were built, for people who wanted to pretend the mechanics of their lives happened somewhere invisible. Elena kept her hand on the wall and followed Dante's shoulder and did not think about the shots still occasionally cracking against the exterior. Fewer now, more deliberate. Whoever they weren't trying to destroy the house. They were trying to drive people somewhere. The thought arrived in her head, and she almost said it out loud. They're not trying to kill us, she said instead, at the back of Dante's shoulder. He slowed but didn't stop. Say that again. The shooting. It's not enough for that. 2 vehicles and they're taking exterior shots? This house could be full of your people. If they wanted to kill us, they'd come in. A beat of silence where the only sounds were their footsteps and a distant shout from somewhere above. They're hurting, Dante said, quietly. To himself mostly. Yes. He stopped. He turned to look at her, and the narrow corridor light made the angles of his face stark. He was thinking fast. She could see it, and what he thought landed in his eyes first before it reached anything else. Smart, he said. Not to compliment her. To assess the situation. Then he moved in the opposite direction from where they'd been heading. The room he took her to was a study at the far end of the first floor. No windows on the exterior wall windows, only on the interior courtyard, which was currently empty. A desk, filing cabinets, a painting on the south wall that turned out to swing outward on a hinge because of course it did, revealing a recessed safe, and above the safe, a small security monitor cycling through camera feeds. Elena watched Dante check each feed in sequence. She counted 11 cameras before he stopped on one and left it there. Feed showed the back garden. It showed one man stationed near the hedges, the overgrown corner. She'd noticed that morning with a sightline toward the rear service entrance. "That's your unknown position," she said. "Yes." He was already on the phone. He spoke in a low, rapid burst that she didn't try to follow. Then he ended the call and looked at the torn safe door. The safe was already open. She could see stacks of documents inside, and a weapon he pulled out now, checking it with the automatic gestures of someone who's long past thinking about the gesture. He looked at her. "There are things I have to tell you," he said. "And I was going to tell you slowly, in order, like someone with the luxury of time." He almost made a sound that could have been a laugh. "We don't have that. Tell me fast then." He set the weapon on the desk. "Your father copied documents from the Marchetti financial network. Specific ledgers showing how a single source inside the organization had been redirecting funds, not stealing. Redirecting, which is harder to trace, because the money always ends up somewhere legitimate. Accounts belonging to legal businesses, foundations, shell companies." He paused. The person doing this was building a separate network inside the existing one, a second power structure. "The architect," Elena said. "The architect." He looked at the wall. Victor found the pattern in the numbers 18 months before he died. He was meticulous. He built a complete map of the secondary network, every account, every transfer node, every front company. If that map exists, it's the most complete piece of evidence anyone has ever assembled on how the Marchetti money actually moves. And my father hid it. He hid it where no one would think to look. He looked at the notebook in her hands. In something he gave to his daughter who he knew would never be connected to this world. Elena looked down at the notebook, at the 7 pages in the back. The numbers she'd seen in columns she didn't yet know how to read. "I can't interpret this," she said. "I don't know what these account numbers connect to." "I do," he said it simply. "Which means if you're willing to let me look at those pages, we might have something." She held the notebook for a moment. She thought about her father at the kitchen table. She thought about the way he'd handed her this specific notebook. This one and not another, looking at her with something she'd read as ordinary fatherly warmth, and now she wondered. She handed it to Dante. He opened to the back pages. He went through them slowly, turning each one with the care of a man who understood that what he was holding was irreplaceable. His face didn't give much away, but his breathing shifted shallow, then controlled, then something that was almost, she didn't know what it was. "This is it," he said quietly. "To no one. Is it enough?" "It's more than enough." He looked up. "It names every account. It names the transfer sequence. And it names—" He stopped. "The person," Elena said. "At the bottom of the 3rd page. Yes, the name you recognized." He didn't answer immediately. He closed the notebook and held it the way she had held it, and she understood that whatever he was working through in the silence, it was real, and it was costing him something. "Raphael Orsini," he said finally. "He's been my lieutenant for 11 years. The house shook, not from another shot, from something larger, a concussive sound from the east wing that rattled the courtyard windows. An explosive device, or something close enough that the distinction stopped mattering. The next 4 minutes were not linear. Elena experienced them in the way that crisis compresses and stretches time, some seconds enormous, some gone, before they registered. Dante's men were in the hallway. 3 of them. Leo was not among them, and Elena noticed that absence and filed it somewhere complicated. One of Dante's men had a cut on his face from flying glass. He was talking fast. She caught fragments, east wing compromised. The gate was breached. 2 people down. Raphael's number still unreachable. Dante listened. He absorbed it. He made decisions that arrived as single short sentences. North exit. Vera comes with me. Nobody moves until my boss. One of the men. Not the one with the cut, a younger one, standing slightly back. Something wrong in how he was holding himself. There's a problem. Dante looked at him. Raphael called in. The young man didn't make eye contact when he said it. A tell so obvious that Elena saw it from across the room. He says he's got a position on who ordered the hit. He wants you to come to the Denton warehouse. Says he can hand you the name. The room held its breath. Dante looked at the young man for a very long time. Not angrily, just completely. When did he call? Dante said. 20 minutes ago. Before the shooting started. The young man's jaw moved. He'd made the calculation and lost it. Yes. Dante's voice was almost gentle. Raphael told you to wait until the shooting started to pass that message. It wasn't a question. The young man knew it wasn't a question. He looked at the floor. The man with the cut on his face moved. The young man's weapon was on the ground before Elena had fully processed that it had happened. No shots, just hands and a wall, and the flat impact sound of a body losing an argument with its surroundings. Elena stood in the center of this and breathed. They left through the north exit into a car that was already running. Leo in the driver's seat, so he wasn't gone. He'd been where Dante needed him, in a position Elena hadn't understood until now. She sat in the back with Dante, and the notebook was in her coat pocket, inside the borrowed gray sweater. That was apparently what she was wearing now during the worst week of her life. Leo drove without being told where. That meant he already knew. Where are we going? Elena asked. Somewhere we're not expected, Dante said. That's not an answer. A property I hold under a name. No one in my organization connects to me. He looked at her, including Raphael. She processed that. You have assets your own lieutenant doesn't know about. I have assets nobody knows about. His voice was flat. You stay alive in this business by understanding that the people closest to you are exactly where exposure comes from. Elena looked out the window at Chicago, going past in the gray morning. Ordinary and relentless. People walking to the train. Someone with a stroller. A delivery truck taking up most of a lane. You've suspected Raphael, she said. Dante didn't answer. Before my father died, she pressed. Before tonight, you suspected someone and you couldn't prove it. I suspected a shape, he said. Not a name. But when I showed you the notebook, when you showed me the notebook, the shape had a name. He looked straight ahead. 11 years. He ran my operations logistics. He had access to every property, every account, every person I trusted. He said it without inflection. But the absence of inflection in a sentence like that carries its own weight. Leo made a turn that pushed them south. The city changed texture. My uncle, Elena said. You think he was working with Raphael. Think someone needed a way to get you through my door without me refusing, and your uncle was a lever that was easy to pull. He looked at her. The debt manipulation was sophisticated. Your uncle isn't sophisticated. He was used. She thought about Marco's face when he'd pushed her through the front door. Terror underneath the bluster. She had read it as guilt, and it was guilt, but maybe not the kind she'd assumed. He didn't know what he was really doing, she said slowly. He knew he was selling you. He probably didn't know he was delivering you into something larger. She turned that over. She didn't forgive her uncle. She wasn't there yet. Might not get there, but the shape of it changed. Marco had been terrified. Marco had done something unforgivable, and he'd been afraid the entire time he was doing it, and that fear wasn't remorse, but it was the fear of a man who understood on some level that the water was deeper than he'd been told. He's in danger, she said. Dante looked at her. If Raphael used him as a mechanism, Marco is a loose end. She said it calmly. She was surprised by the calm. He'll know that. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Leo. Already on it, Leo said from the front. Elena didn't ask what that meant. She was learning to trust that some sentences in this world completed themselves in actions she wasn't meant to see. Property turned out to be a 3-story walk-up above a dry cleaner, in a neighborhood that wanted to be gentrified but hadn't gotten there yet. Inside clean, minimal, the kind of functional that suggested it had been set up for exactly this use and no other. 3 rooms, a secure Wi-Fi connection, supplies that included both food and things Elena chose not to examine too closely. Dante set the notebook on the table. He sat down. He looked at the 7 pages again, this time with a notepad beside him, and Elena sat across from him and watched him work and understood for the first time in 24 hours that whatever was going to happen next was going to happen because of what father had written in the back of a green leather notebook and left with a 13-year-old girl who didn't know what she was carrying. My father knew you'd survive, she said. Dante looked up. He didn't give this to my mother. He gave it to me. The one who would still be young enough. She stopped. Started again. He expected you to still be here. He expected this moment to be possible. Dante looked at her with something she still didn't have a name for. It was heavier than what she'd seen in the foyer, and quieter. Victor believed in long games, he said. So do you, Elena said. He didn't argue. She leaned forward and looked at the numbers on the third page, at the columns, at the careful architecture of what her father had spent months building in secret, knowing what it cost, knowing that if it was found too soon, it would get him killed. Did get him killed, but he had left a thread. I need to understand what I'm looking at, she said. Teach me. Dante looked at her across the table. He was still deciding something. She could always feel it with him, the internal weight of decisions he was used to making alone. Then he turned the notebook toward her and began. It took 2 hours. She was not a financial expert, but she was meticulous. She had spent years coordinating medical supply logistics, which was its own language of numbers and cross-referencing, and her father's handwriting was clear. The picture assembled itself slowly, and it was worse than she'd expected. The secondary network Raphael had built, the one her father had mapped, didn't just move money. It moved obligations, favors, leverage, compromised individuals across 3 city agencies, a federal prosecutor's office, and the senior management of 2 rival crime families. The architect hadn't been stealing from the Marchetti syndicate. He had been building a replacement for it, a quieter, cleaner, more legally insulated version, designed to absorb the original the moment the original collapsed. And the original was going to collapse because Raphael was going to make it collapse, and the evidence that would take it down would be already arranged to point at Dante. Elena read that part twice. He's going to frame you, she said. He's been building this for years. The documentation trails to you. Yes, that's why he needed me here. It landed hard when it fully assembled. He needed a reason to have you investigated. A young woman delivered against her will to the head of a crime family. That's the headline that opens an investigation. Except instead of finding what's real, investigators find what Raphael has already planted. Dante's face was very still. He was going to use me as the match, Elena said. Burn you down with, and walk away from the fire the only man left standing. The room was quiet. Outside a car went past slowly, and Dante's eyes moved to the window without his head moving. And Elena understood that the car was nothing because he didn't stand up. We have the evidence, she said. We have 1 copy in a notebook that isn't yet verified, held by 2 people in a walk-up in Pilsen. He wasn't dismissive. He was precise. Raphael has resources, planted documentation, and an activated team that just hit my primary residence. So we need to move before he does. We needed to move before he did. We're currently behind. She looked at the notebook, at her father's handwriting, at the name at the bottom of the 3rd page, written in blue pen, in the measured hand of a man who had known he was writing something dangerous. My uncle, she said again. Dante's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something shifted in his face. Quick and deep, a fault line. What? Elena asked. Marco Vera turned himself into the Chicago Police Department 40 minutes ago. He read from the phone. He's claiming he was coerced into delivering his niece to the Valerio estate by a man who identified himself as a representative of the Marchetti syndicate. A pause. He's named Raphael Orsini. Elena stared at him. Your uncle, Dante said quietly, just made himself the most dangerous man in the city. He's not wrong. The moment Marco's name touches Raphael's through official channels, Raphael will have no choice but to move fast. And moving fast means Marco Vera will not survive the week unless someone gets to him first, which means Elena has about 6 hours before the person who sold her to settle a debt becomes the only family she has left in genuine mortal danger. And every choice in front of her now closes one door the moment it opens another. Dante was already moving before Elena finished processing what the message meant. He crossed to the window not to look out, to listen, angling his head the way people do when they're reading the texture of outside from inside. 3 seconds. He came back. We have maybe 2 hours before Raphael knows where we are, he said. Marco going to the police doesn't help us. It creates a paper trail that points at this neighborhood, because Marco knows about this property. Not the address, but the district. I told him once, years ago, when I thought he was someone worth telling things to. Elena looked at him. You knew my uncle. I knew of him. Victor mentioned him. His voice was careful in the way voices get careful around things that hurt. He said Marco was weak, but not cruel. Apparently, Victor was half right. She didn't have anything to say to that. She picked up the notebook and put it in her inside coat pocket against her ribs, where she could feel it with each breath. Police, she said. Marco going to them, does that give us anything? Gives us a clock. Dante was pulling on his jacket. Raphael has people inside the CPD. Not many, not at the top, but enough to know when a name like his gets typed into an intake report. He'll know within the hour. He looked at her. Which means Marco is currently sitting in an interview room, believing he is safe, and he is the least safe person in the city. Then we get him out. Dante looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite patience, and wasn't quite its opposite. He sold you, he said. I know what he did. Elena, he is the only person who was in the room with Raphael's representative. She said it cleanly, the way she'd learned to say difficult things at work without the emotion that would make people dismiss the content. He's a witness. He's evidence. And he is my family, which I'm allowed to feel complicated about without you weighing in on it. A beat of silence. Fair, Dante said. Leo was already outside with the car running. He had the particular quality of a man who anticipated exits, and Elena was beginning to understand that this was his primary value in Dante's world. Not muscle, not information, but the ability to be exactly where the door was, before anyone knew the door existed. In the car, Dante made calls, short ones, in a sequence using a phone she hadn't seen before, not the one from the estate. She watched the city scroll past and listened to the half of each conversation she could hear, and tried to build the picture. There was a contact at the 2nd District, someone who owed Dante something old enough that the debt had calcified into loyalty, which was the only kind of debt in this world that held its value. That person could get Marco moved, not released. Moved. Transferred to a holding location that wasn't on Raphael's grid. It would take 90 minutes. They had, Dante estimated, slightly less. There's something else, Leo said from the front. He said it to the windshield, not to either of them, which was how Leo delivered information he wasn't sure anyone wanted. Say it, Dante said. Raphael put out a communication 2 hours ago. Not to the crew, to the outer network. The independent contractors he's used over the years for one-off work. Leo's hand stayed steady on the wheel. He's activated a finder's fee. For me, Dante said. For her. Leo's eyes moved to the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second. 50,000 for confirmed location. 200 for the other outcome. Car was very quiet. Elena looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about the number 200,000 as if it were an abstract thing, and not the assigned value of her continued existence. She thought about her father, who had worked inside this world for 9 years, and had still believed he could protect his family from it. He knows about the notebook, she said. He knows your father had something, Dante said. He may not know yet that you have it. He knows I walked into your house last night, carrying a suitcase. He knows I'm still alive this morning. She looked at Dante. If he's been inside your operation for 11 years, he knows how you think. He'll have calculated that you've talked to me, that I've given you something. Dante didn't argue, which means he knows the notebook exists, she said, even if he doesn't know where it is. Yes. She pressed her hand flat over the pocket where the notebook sat. The leather was thin enough that she could feel the edge of the pages. My father built something that could destroy Raphael, she said, and Raphael has spent 8 years assuming it was lost. You walked through my front door, and now he needs to find me before I know how to use what I'm carrying. She thought about it. He's scared. Frightened people are not easier, Dante said. They're faster. They didn't go to the 2nd District. Dante got a call 11 minutes into the drive that changed the route. Marco had already been moved, not by Dante's contact, but by someone else. Transferred to a federal holding facility downtown under a procedural flag that nobody at the district level had ordered. Dante stared at the phone after the call ended. That's not your person, Elena said. No. Raphael? Raphael doesn't have federal reach. Not real reach. He was thinking hard. She could see it in the slight tension at his jaw, the way his eyes went somewhere interior. This is someone else who knows Marco is important. Someone else who wants Marco contained before he talks to the wrong people. He looked at her, or the right ones. Leo pulled the car to the side of a street near the river and let it idle. This was apparently how decisions got made in this world, pulled over on secondary streets with the heat running and rain starting again against the windshield. The architect document, Dante said. He was talking to himself as much as her. Father's map. It's not just Raphael's network. You set yourself 3 city agencies, a federal prosecutor's office. He paused. If there is a federal element to this, it means Raphael isn't working alone at that level. Someone above him has exposure. Elena went cold. Someone in federal law enforcement, she said. Adjacent. His voice was very careful. Someone with the authority to flag a transfer at a city precinct and have it executed inside 40 minutes. Then the notebook doesn't just end Raphael, she said slowly. It ends someone bigger, which means there are now at least 2 separate entities trying to locate you, and they may not be coordinating. She looked out the rain-streaked window at the river, which was the color of old pewter today. Choppy and indifferent. My uncle is now in federal custody, she said. Being held by someone connected to the network my father spent 2 years mapping. Someone who knows or will know that Marco Vera's niece was delivered to the Valerio estate. Yes, they'll use him to find me, if they haven't already started. She reached into her coat and pulled out the notebook. She set it on her knee. She looked at the green leather and the cracked corners and the date her father had written inside the cover, and she felt something in her chest that wasn't grief exactly. And because grief is usually one thing, and this was several things compacted together into a weight she was going to have to learn to carry while moving. We need to make copies, she said, of everything in these pages. Scanned digital multiple locations. Dante nodded. And we need to do it before anyone knows we're doing it. She looked at him. Do you have somewhere? Not connected to your network. Somewhere clean. He was quiet for a moment. There is one place, he said. The place turned out to be a print shop in Wicker Park, owned by a woman named Carla, who was 62, and had the manner of someone who had agreed long ago to never be surprised by anything. She and Dante exchanged no pleasantries. She took the notebook, went to a back room, and returned 22 minutes later with the notebook, 3 printed sets of the pages in question, and 2 USB drives. She handed everything to Dante without a word. He handed her an envelope. She put the envelope in her apron pocket without looking at it. Elisa watched this transaction and thought about how many years it took to build the kind of trust that didn't require language. She thought about what that kind of trust cost. The drives, she said when they were outside. One goes somewhere they can't connect to either of us. Agreed. He looked at the drives in his palm. I know where. Where? He looked at her. A slight pause, not reluctance. Recalibration. There's a safety deposit box at a bank in Evanston. The account it's attached to belongs to a woman named Diane Vera. Elena stopped walking. The rain was light now. More mist than rain. The kind that accumulates, without feeling like it's doing anything until you realize you're soaked. My mother, she said. Victor opened it 12 years ago, Dante said. He told me about it once. Said if anything ever happened, there was a location his wife could access that would give her options. He paused. I don't think she's ever used it. I don't think she knows it exists. My mother doesn't know my father had a safety deposit box in her name. No. Elena stood in the mist and worked through what that meant. Her father had been careful in every direction, careful with his daughter, careful with his wife, compartmentalized protection of them so thoroughly that neither had known the other piece existed. It was not a comfortable thing to realize about someone you'd loved without qualification. He thought of everything, she said. And then, because she was 27, and standing in the rain in borrowed clothes holding copies of documents that had gotten her father killed, except himself, Dante didn't say anything. She appreciated that. They were back in the car heading toward Evanston when Dante's new phone rang. Unknown number. He looked at it for 2 full rings before he answered. He said nothing. He just listened. Elena watched his face. She had gotten reasonably good at reading it in the past 18 hours, not good, but better than most people probably got in a week. What she saw now was something she hadn't seen before, something that went past the locked-down professional stillness and into a place that was just human, just raw, the way faces go when the news is the kind that doesn't have a frame around it yet. He ended the call. Who was that? Elena said. Dante's hands were still on his knees. He wasn't looking at her. That was Raphael, he said. Carr felt smaller. He has your mother. The world went very quiet and very large at the same time. Elena heard the traffic outside. She heard Leo's slight intake of breath from the front seat. She heard her own heartbeat, which was doing something clinical and rapid that she identified as shock and then pushed past because shock was not something she could afford to wear right now. Say that again, she said. Diane Vera. Raphael's people picked her up from her apartment in Bridgeport 40 minutes ago. His voice was controlled, but it was costing him. He says she's not harmed. He says she stays that way if you deliver the notebook to him directly. No intermediaries. He knows about the notebook. He knows your father had documentation. He may not know what form. Dante looked at her. He said, "What Victor left?" Those exact words. Elena looked at her hands. They were shaking. She pressed them flat on her thighs, and they stopped, mostly. He wants a trade, she said. He wants you to come to him. Alone. With the notebook. With whatever you have. She thought about her mother, Diane Vera, who had become quieter after Victor died, who worked part-time at a pharmacy counting pills with the focus of someone who needed her hands to have a clear task, who called Elena every Sunday at 11 and talked about ordinary things, the neighbor's dog, a television program. Whether the radiator was making that sound again. Her mother, who knew nothing about any of this, who had spent 8 years being the widow of a man she thought was an insurance accountant. Leo, Elena said. Yeah. Leo said from the front. Drive where to? She looked at Dante. Give me an address. Elena, he said alone. He didn't say immediately. She held his gaze, which means we have a window. Small, but it's there. She thought fast, in the way she'd learned to think at work, when a supply failure cascaded and 3 departments were simultaneously, without equipment, identify the actual problem, not the presenting one, then locate the resource that solves the actual problem. He wants the notebook. He believes the notebook is the only copy. He does believe that, Dante said slowly. Because your father kept it secret for 14 years, she said, and nobody knew it existed until last night. Yes. So if I go to him, you're not going to him. Dante. She said his name the way you say a name when you need someone to hear you and not the version of you they're currently projecting. If I go to him with the original notebook and he believes it's the only copy, he'll take it and he'll think this is over. He'll release my mother because she's worthless to him the moment he has what he needs. And then he kills you. Not if he doesn't know the copies exist. He'll know. Not if the copies are already moving. She looked at him. The drive. The Evanston box. If the evidence is already in your hands and moving through a channel Raphael can't intercept, then my going to him becomes something different. Dante was looking at her with an expression she recognized now. It was the expression of someone recalculating, not the plan, the person across from them. You want to be the distraction, he said. I want to be the reason he looks the wrong direction, long enough for you to do something he can't undo. She paused. I want my mother back. I'm not using you as bait. You're not using me as anything. I'm deciding. She held his gaze. There's a difference. You said so yourself, first night. Told me I wasn't property. You told me I had a choice. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. So let me choose. The car moved through wet streets. Leo said nothing. He had the particular wisdom of a man who understood. When a conversation had moved past, it's the point where any third voice added value. Dante looked out the window. His jaw was tight. She could see him turning it over, looking for the argument that would hold, finding the places where it didn't. The meat location, he said finally. He gave one? Did he? Dante looked at his phone. Denton Warehouse. South Side. He paused. The same location he asked me to come to this morning. He likes that place. He owns it. Under a shell. His voice was dry. Apparently, I didn't know as much about my lieutenant's real estate as I thought. Then he'll be comfortable there. Comfortable people make assumptions. She looked at the notebook in her hands. I need 1 hour before I go in. To get the copy to Evanston. To make sure the evidence is somewhere safe. And to make sure you have a position before I walk through that door. You're asking me to let you walk into a building controlled by the man who killed your father. She hadn't put it quite that way to herself until he said it. The weight of it was real. She acknowledged the weight and kept going. Yes, she said. I'm asking you to trust me the way my father trusted you. She paused. Was he wrong to? The next hour moved with the particular density of time when everything matters. Leo drove to Evanston. Elena sat in the car while Dante went into the bank and placed the USB drive in the box that had been sitting untouched in her mother's name for 12 years. Came out 4 minutes later and nodded once. She sent a message to Dante's secure contact, a woman named Iris, who Elena didn't know and didn't ask about, and who received an encrypted document package and confirmed receipt in 6 minutes. Then Dante made a call that took 12 minutes and consisted mostly of him talking in a low voice to someone who asked questions. He answered in single words. When it was done, he looked at Elena. I have 4 people who can position around the Denton building inside 40 minutes, he said. Roof, east approach, the loading access on the south side, and the electrical panel outside. If Raphael has more than 6 men inside, it becomes complicated. How complicated? Survivable complicated or genuinely complicated? Just tell me. Survivable, he said. Probably. She appreciated the probably. It was an honest word. Took the notebook out of her coat. She held it for a moment, looking at the green cover, the cracked corners, at the thing her father had pressed into her hands. When she was 13, Satine, and she'd carried for 14 years without knowing what she was carrying. My father gave this to me, she said, not to hide it from the world, to make sure it survived long enough to matter. She looked up. It's going to matter today. She thought about the name at the bottom of the 3rd page. She thought about the federal connection, the unknown figure above Raphael, who had moved Marco inside 40 minutes. Thought about the copies, plural, now existing in locations Raphael didn't know. She thought about her mother counting pills at a pharmacy and calling on Sundays. She zipped the notebook into her interior pocket. Tell your people 40 minutes, she said. Dante reached into his jacket. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small device flat, barely larger than a coin. It transmits audio, he said. Not location can be blocked, but audio will reach us from inside the building. Took it. It was lighter than she expected. When you walk in, Dante said, keep him talking. Whatever he tells you, whatever he reveals, just keep him talking. She looked at him. And if it goes wrong, he held her gaze. Something moved in his face, not reassurance. Something more honest than that. Something that acknowledged what it was, acknowledging without dressing it up. Then I come in anyway, he said. She nodded. She reached for the door handle. Elena. She stopped, Dante said. His voice was different, lower, stripped of its professional architecture. He talked about you. When things were bad, when he was afraid he would say your name. Fixed point. He paused. I thought you should know that. She held the door handle for a moment. She pressed her lips together once. Thank you, she said, and got out of the car. The Denton warehouse was 6 blocks south. She could walk it in 12 minutes. She had 40 before Dante's people were in position, which meant she had 28 minutes to be somewhere unremarkable, to breathe the cold air, to be Victor Veyra's daughter, who had spent 14 years carrying something without knowing it and was now going to walk into a room and use it, and to understand fully in the marrow, in the place where choices calcify into character, that after today, regardless of outcome, she would not be the same person who had foyed 20 hours ago, in a borrowed black dress with shaking hands she was hiding behind her back. She started walking. She had gone 4 blocks when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stopped. She answered. The voice on the other end was not Raphael. It was her mother, Elena. Diane Veyra's voice was steady, which was the most frightening thing about it. Her mother was steadiest. When she was most afraid, Elena had learned that at 19, standing in a hospital corridor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The man who brought me here, he's not who he told you he is. Elena's feet stopped moving entirely. Mom, he told me something, her mother said. Before they took my phone, he told me so I would tell you. A breath. Steady. Terrible. He said your father didn't copy those records to expose anyone. He said Victor built the network himself. The city went silent around her. He said, the architect, her mother said, was your father. Elena stood on that sidewalk for 11 seconds. She counted them without meaning to, the way the body counts things, when the body counts when the mind is trying to keep itself from going somewhere it can't come back from. Then she called Dante. He picked up before the first ring finished. I heard, he said, the audio device. He'd been listening. Is it possible, she asked. Her voice came out flat. She needed it flat. Is it possible my father built it? A pause that lasted exactly as long as a man takes when he's choosing between a merciful lie and a true thing that's going to hurt. I don't know, Dante said. That's not an answer. The only honest one I have right now. She heard him moving. A door. Footsteps. Victor was the one who came to me. Victor was the one who told me about the architect. Victor gave me a name, a false one as it turned out, and a direction that led nowhere for 8 years. He stopped moving. I believed him because I trusted him. I never considered that the trail he gave me was designed to be followed without ever arriving. The cold air moved through her coat like it had permission. Raphael said it to my mother, to destabilize me, she said. She wasn't sure if she was arguing or processing. If I walk in there believing my father was the enemy, I walk in broken. Yes, so maybe it's not true, maybe. A beat. Or maybe your father spent 9 years building something, realized what it was becoming, tried to dismantle it from the inside, and died before he could finish. Another beat. Either version of Victor Vera is possible. I've been turning that over for the last 30 seconds, and I can't eliminate either one. Pressed her back against a building. Brick, cold, real. She focused on the physical sensation of it, because it was the only thing currently not ambiguous. My mother, she said. Leo is rerouting. We have a position on the building. 2 of my 4 people are already in place. The other 2 are 6 minutes out. His voice changed. Lower. Elena, you do not have to walk in there. My mother is in there. I can get her out. You don't know that. He didn't say anything, which was its own answer. She pushed off the wall. 30 minutes, she said. Give me 30 minutes before you move. If I'm not out, or if the audio goes dead. 15, he said. 30 is too long. 20. 17, and you don't negotiate further. She almost said something. Instead, she just started walking again. The Denton warehouse, from the outside, was exactly what it looked like from a street that didn't want to be looked at. A long, low building with a flat roof and loading doors on the south face, and windows that had been painted over from the inside, at some point so far in the past that the paint had started flaking back off in patches. The kind of building that existed in cities as a function of what cities needed to forget they were doing. A man outside the east door, not hiding, hands at his sides, watching her come from half a block away with the particular stillness of someone who is paid to wait and has made peace with it. She walked straight at him. Vera, she said when she was close enough. He nodded. He opened the door. Inside was warmer than outside, which shouldn't have felt like a threat but did. The warehouse floor was large and mostly empty concrete. High ceiling, a row of industrial lights hanging from cables, about half of them actually functioning. The working lights threw sharp pools of yellow down onto the floor with deep shadow between them. And Elena's brain automatically cataloged the shadows as she walked because her body understood something that hadn't fully arrived in words yet. There were more than 6 men in here, counted without counting a presence at the far left wall. 2 near the loading doors, 1 elevated on a catwalk she could see on the right, and at least 1 more somewhere in the back, dark beyond the reach of the lights. Raphael ran 7 visible from her current position. That was the complicated number Dante had mentioned. Raphael himself was standing in the center of the floor. He was shorter than she'd expected, middle height, compact, with the kind of face that was probably forgettable until you knew what it belonged to, and then it was unforgettable in the wrong way. Late 40s, dark suit, incongruous in this space. A man who dressed for the position he intended to hold. Her mother was seated on a metal chair 10 feet behind him. She was wearing her coat from home, the charcoal one, with the loose button on the 3rd snap that she kept meaning to fix. She looked at Elena the way she'd looked at Elena at Victor's funeral, like she was the one fixed point in a room that was moving. Elena looked at her mother for exactly 1 second. 1 second to verify upright, unharmed, coat still buttoned, which meant her hands hadn't been tied. She filed it and moved her eyes back to Raphael. You came alone, Raphael said. He sounded mildly surprised. The way a careful man sounds when something goes the way he predicted, and he is still verifying. You asked me to. I've learned not to take ass seriously in this business. He tilted his head. Where's Dante? I don't know where Dante is. That's interesting. Because 3 hours ago, you were in a car with him in Pilsen. She held his gaze. She did not ask how he knew that. Asking would tell him that the information surprised her, and she needed him to believe she was past being surprised. I left on my own, she said. He didn't want me to come here. And yet my mother, Elena said. Simply. Something moved in Raphael's face. Not softness. Just recognition. The acknowledgement of a mechanism that had functioned as designed. The notebook, he said. She reached into her inside pocket. Slowly. Both hands visible. She pulled out the notebook and held it at her side. Raphael's eyes went to it. The hunger there was fast and quickly managed, but she caught it, and she understood that whatever he'd told her mother about Victor, the notebook mattered to him in a way that wasn't just professional. There was something personal in the way he looked at it. Bring it here, he said. My mother walks to the door first. You're not negotiating. I'm telling you the sequence. She kept her voice level. She walks to the door. The door opens. I see her outside. Then I walk the notebook to you. She paused. You get what you came for either way. The sequence just determines whether I drop this on the floor and walk out or whether I hand it to you. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. The man on the catwalk had shifted position. She felt it in her peripheral vision without looking directly at it. You know what's in it, Raphael said. I know what my father wrote in it. Then you know your father was not what you believed. Kept her face exactly where it was. I know my father is dead. I know you're the reason. The rest is details. Something happened in Raphael's expression that she hadn't anticipated, something that looked, for just a flicker, like it was wounded. She filed that too. Let her go, he said. Not to Elena. To someone behind her. She heard her mother stand. She heard footsteps crossing concrete. She did not turn around. She held Raphael's eyes until she heard the east door open and close, and the footstep sound moved outside. One breath. Your mother is safer than she knows, Raphael said. He said it with an odd weight, like the sentence meant something different than its surface. That's a strange thing to say. Victor would have understood it. She took 4 steps toward him. She held the notebook out. He reached for it. She didn't let go. He looked up from the notebook to her face. Tell me what my father actually was, she said. You told my mother he built the network. Tell me the rest. This isn't a negotiation. You have 6 men in this room, and I'm one person holding something you've spent 8 years trying to find. She kept her grip on the notebook. You can afford 2 minutes. His jaw moved. He looked at the notebook, and then at her, and the calculation moved through him visibly. Victor didn't build it to profit, Raphael said. He built it to control. He said it like the distinction mattered, and she understood that to him it did, deeply, in the way that people who have spent years justifying something to themselves care intensely about the specific shape of the justification. He saw what the families were: extortion, debt, fear, and he thought he could construct something cleaner, something that operated in the background without the violence. He paused. He was, in many ways, a genius. The network he built, the secondary structure, it moved money out of illegal operations and into legitimate ones. Slowly, generationally, he thought he was. He stopped. Laundering a criminal empire into a legitimate one, Elena said. Transforming it. How is that different? Raphael looked at her with something that was almost respect. It isn't, he said. That's what he eventually understood. By year 7, he understood that what he'd built was still a cage, just a cleaner one. So he decided to expose it, and you decided to stop him. I decided to preserve what he'd built. Raphael's voice tightened for the first time. A hairline fracture in the controlled surface. 11 years I maintained that network. 11 years I kept it running without the violence. Victor hated without the brutality of the families it serviced. and he was going to burn it down because he'd developed a conscience in his old age. She could feel her heartbeat in her hands where they gripped the notebook. "So you had him killed," she said. "I made a decision," Raphael said. "The same kind of decision Victor made 100 times. He was my father. He was also the architect." Raphael met her eyes. "Both things are true. I'm sorry they are, but they are." She let go of the notebook. Raphael took it. He opened it immediately, not to examine it, to verify, checking for the pages in the back. She watched his eyes move and stop and move again. Then they stopped completely. He turned to the third page. He looked at the bottom of it. He looked up at her. "This name," he said. His voice had changed, dropped to something colder and much more dangerous. "Where did he get this name?" She looked at the notebook, at the name at the bottom of the third page, the one she and Dante had read that morning at a table in a walk-up in Pilsen, the name that Dante had gone pale at. "My father wrote it," she said. "I know he wrote it." Raphael's hand was tight on the notebook. "This is not my name. I have never gone by this name. I am not connected to this name in any document, any record, any transaction." He looked at her. "Who is this?" The warehouse was very quiet. Elena felt something realign in her chest. Something that had been sitting wrong since her mother's phone call on the sidewalk, a sentence that hadn't parsed correctly until this exact moment. Raphael didn't know whose name was on the third page, which meant Raphael had not put it there, which meant her father had written a name that Raphael himself didn't recognize, and that name was somebody else's. And that somebody else was the person who had moved Marco Vera into federal custody in 40 minutes, and that somebody else was currently not in this warehouse. "You didn't engineer this alone," she said. "Answer me. You had a partner." She looked at him. The pieces were arriving fast now, faster than she could fully assemble them, but the shape was becoming clear. Someone above you. Someone with federal reach. Someone Victor identified separately. Someone you don't even know your partner's real name, because people like that don't give you their real names. Raphael's face had gone very still. "You've been working for someone," Elena said, "and you don't know who they actually are." Something moved on the catwalk above her. She heard it in the shift of metal, not a weapon raised, but a person repositioning. She looked up. The man on the catwalk was looking at his phone. His phone was lit up. He looked down at Raphael and said, "We have a problem." The next 45 seconds were not in any order that her memory would later be able to reconstruct cleanly. She would remember the sequence in images rather than continuous movement. Raphael turning toward the catwalk man, the east door going in hard and fast, the sound of Dante's voice somewhere to her left, saying something in Italian she didn't catch. Specific way the overhead lights swung on their cables from the concussive force of the door, the cold air that flooded in from outside. She moved, not toward the door, away from it, right, toward the cover of a stacked row of old pallets along the wall, because the east door was where Dante's people were coming in, and the east door was also where everyone in this room was going to point their attention, which made it the most dangerous place to be. She hit the ground behind the pallets on both hands and knees and felt the concrete through the borrowed jeans, the sting of it up through her wrists. Someone fired. She didn't know who. The sound in an enclosed concrete space is not the sound from television. It is enormous and immediate, and it takes up all the air, and she felt her ears adjust to accommodate it and understood that her body was already operating faster than her thinking, because her thinking was still catching up. She looked through a gap in the pallets. Dante was inside. He had come through the east door with 2 men, and there were already 2 more coming in. From what she now understood was a door she hadn't noticed in the back wall, the elevated access to the exterior loading dock, now standing open with outside gray light in the frame. Raphael's 7 were not all in the same place they'd been 30 seconds ago. People in a crisis don't stay where you last put them. 2 had moved toward the south loading doors, One was down. She didn't look at that carefully. The catwalk man was descending, not to fight, but to reach something. She traced his trajectory and understood he was heading for a panel box on the north wall. The lights. She stood up from behind the pallets. The panel, she said. She said it loud, louder than she'd expected her voice to be. North wall, he's going for the lights. She didn't know if Dante heard her. She moved along the wall anyway, keeping low, keeping the pallets at her back for as long as she could, because if the lights went out, this room became a different problem entirely. Catwalk man was faster than her. He reached the panel. The lights went out. Not all of them. 3 of the working overheads cut, which was enough to collapse most of the visual geometry of the space. The remaining 2 threw light in angles that created more shadow than they resolved. Elena stopped moving. She pressed herself against the wall and let her eyes adjust and breathe through her nose, because breathing through her mouth in the dark makes sound. 8 seconds. Her eyes found shapes. The catwalk structure, angular. Movement in the south doors. 2 shapes trying to exit. One of Dante's men cutting them off. Scuffle rather than a shot, which meant they were too close together for anyone to risk it. Raphael. She scanned the center of the floor. He wasn't there. She scanned toward the east door. Not there either. She turned and looked toward the back, toward the loading dock door that was still open, toward the rectangle of gray outside light. He was moving through it. He still had the notebook. She went after him. Outside the loading dock was a concrete ramp and then a service alley that ran along the south side of the building. Raphael was already at the end of it, moving fast, the kind of fast that people are when they're choosing direction over speed, controlled and deliberate rather than panicked, which told her he had a vehicle somewhere nearby, which told her she had maybe 30 seconds before he was in it, and the notebook was gone, and everything her father built, and everything she'd carried for 14 years, was, without knowing, it disappeared into the back of a car heading somewhere she'd never find. She ran. She was not a runner. She was someone who took the stairs instead of the elevator, and occasionally felt good about it. Raphael had a 15-foot head start and longer legs, and the particular advantage of knowing where he was going. She ran anyway. She ran with the notebook, the original, the real one, pulsing against her ribs in her interior pocket, and she thought about the copies in Evanston, and about Iris, and about the 17-minute window that Dante had insisted on, and, she thought, he is running toward something, but I am running toward him, and that is a different calculation. She caught him at the end of the alley, not because she was faster, because a delivery truck had pulled across the alley section onto the side street 30 seconds before she'd exited the building, and it was sitting there with its engine running and its hazards on, and Raphael had to go around it. Turned left. She turned left. She caught the back of his jacket with both hands, and her weight and momentum did the rest. Not a clean tackle. Nothing athletic about it. Just 2 people and gravity and the side of a parked car that they both hit hard. She felt the impact in her shoulder and hip simultaneously, the jolt of it going through her teeth. Raphael went down. She went with him. He was stronger than her, and he knew it, and she knew it. And she had approximately 4 seconds before that knowledge became the determining fact of the next 30. She didn't try to take the notebook. She grabbed right wrist with both hands, and she put everything she had into turning it the wrong direction, against the joint, the way someone showed her once in a hospital parking lot safety seminar, that she had thought was mildly useful at the time and was now intensely grateful for. He made a sound, and the notebook hit the wet pavement. She grabbed it. She got up and she ran back toward the warehouse, because it was the only direction she could think to run, and she heard him behind her, and she heard something else, a car, moving, not the delivery truck, a different engine and a door, and Leo's voice saying her name. She got in. Leo pulled out before the door was fully closed. She grabbed the handle and pulled it shut and sat in the back seat with the notebook, against her chest, and her whole body shaking with the specific force of adrenaline, completing its work. Dante, she seconds, Leo said. She looked out the rear window. The alley. Raphael standing at the end of it, watching the car, not chasing. He was on his phone. He's calling someone, she said. He's been calling someone since he hit that loading dock, Leo said. We've been listening. She looked at the front seat. Small speaker on the dash, a phone propped beside it. The audio from Raphael's calls, live, currently playing the sound of a line connecting, and then a voice she didn't recognize, older, measured, the kind of voice that lived behind other voices. Gone, Raphael said into his phone. She has the original. Dante's people are inside. We need to move the timeline. A pause. Then the other voice said, bring me the girl, not the notebook. Her. Elena went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Because the voice that said it, the measured one, the older one, she'd heard it before. Not recently, not in this context. A long time ago, in the peripheral way, that children hear adult conversations they aren't meant to process. Her father's study. A Sunday evening. She'd been maybe 9 or 10. She'd gone to ask Victor something about dinner, and the study door had been open 2 inches, and her father had been on the phone, speaking quietly, and a voice on the other end of that call had said something that made Victor go very still. And then Victor had looked up and seen Elena standing in the hallway and closed the door, gently, deliberately. She had forgotten that moment for 18 years. She remembered it now with the full precision of childhood memory, which keeps things in a different drawer than adult memory, and preserves them in a different kind of amber. She knew that voice. She didn't have a name for it, but somewhere in the 7 pages her father had written, in the back of a green leather notebook, there was a name, at the bottom of the 3rd page, that Raphael Orsini didn't recognize, and that name belonged to a voice that had been inside her father's life long before the architect existed, and long after Victor Vera was buried in a cemetery outside Gary. Leo, she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Get me back to Dante. He's coming out now, Leo said. She looked through the windshield. The east door of the warehouse. Dante walking fast, one hand pressed to his left side, in a way that he probably thought was less obvious than it was. She was out of the car before it fully stopped. You're hurt, she said. It's manageable. That is not the same as fine. I know the difference. He got into the back seat and pulled the door shut, and she got in after him. And Leo drove, and Dante sat with his jaw set and his hand pressed flat against his left ribs, and she could see the dark spreading under. His jacket, that he was pretending wasn't spreading. Raphael got out, she said. I know, he called someone. A voice I didn't recognize. Leo has the audio. She paused. I recognized the voice. Dante looked at her. His face was tight with pain. He was holding at a controlled distance. From where? He said. My childhood. She looked at the notebook in her hands. The name on the 3rd page. I don't know who it belongs to yet, but I've heard them speak. She met his eyes. They want me. Not the notebook. Me. Dante's hand pressed harder against his ribs. His breathing was controlled but audible now. Why you specifically, he said. Not a question. Thinking. Because I recognized the voice. She kept her eyes on him. Means I've met them. Which means I can identify them. Which means the notebook is secondary. I am the evidence. Car moved through the city in the gray afternoon light. Rain again. Just beginning. Streaking the windows. Federal connection, Dante said. The person who moved Marco in 40 minutes. That's the same voice. It has to be. Then we're not dealing with a syndicate problem. He looked at the ceiling of the car, breathing. We're dealing with someone who has been inside both worlds simultaneously for 20 years. Legal and illegal. Someone your father built a network for and then tried to expose. His jaw tightened. Someone who has been watching this city from a position so embedded that nobody has ever looked directly at them. Elena looked at the notebook. at the name at the bottom of the third page. At the 7 pages her father had written, knowing they might be the last thing he ever completed. He knew, she said quietly. My father knew exactly who he was writing that name for. He knew I'd be the one who could confirm it. She looked at Dante. That's why he gave it to me. Not because I was safe. Because I was the only one who had ever been in the same room as that voice and survived long enough to remember it. Dante reached over with his free hand. He took the notebook from her carefully. He turned to the third page. He looked at the name. Then he looked at her with something in his face she'd never seen there before, not fear, because she understood now that fear wasn't in his register, but something adjacent to it that looked like the moment before a very large decision. Do you know this man? She asked. He was quiet for 3 seconds. I know the name, he said. I've heard it once, 7 years ago, from someone who said it like saying it out loud was dangerous. He paused. I didn't believe the implication at the time. I didn't have a reason to. And now? He closed the notebook. He looked straight ahead. Outside, Chicago moved past them in the rain, enormous and indifferent, full of ordinary people doing ordinary things, none of whom knew that in the back of a car on a secondary street, a woman was holding 17 minutes worth of her father's life's work, and a man was pressing his hand against a wound that was more serious than he was admitting. And between them, they had the name of someone who had been living inside the machinery of this city for 2 decades. And that person now knew they had it. Now I have a reason, Dante said. Leo made a turn. Car accelerated. In her coat pocket, Elena's phone buzzed. She pulled it out. An unknown number different from Raphael's call, different from her mother's. She answered. A voice she knew. Measured. Older. The one from the speaker on Lowe's dash, and also the one from a Sunday evening 30 years ago, heard through a 2-inch gap in a study door. Elena Vera, the voice said, have something that belonged to your father. I'd like to have a conversation about what you intend to do with it. A pause. Unhurried. The pause of someone who had never needed to rush anything in their life because they had always controlled the sequence. Just you and me, tonight. I think you'll find I'm more reasonable than Raphael led you to believe. Another pause. I also think, if you're honest with yourself, that you already know my name. She looked at the notebook. She looked at Dante. He was watching her with the wound in his side, and the question in his eyes, and the weight of 11 years of wrong assumptions sitting somewhere behind his face, and she understood that whatever she said next was going to determine whether this ended tonight or dragged into something longer and darker and more costly than either of them could currently afford. Put the phone to her ear. Tell me where, she said. The address the voice gave her was a hotel downtown that had been closed for renovation for 3 years and hadn't actually been renovated for any of them. Elena knew the building by sight. Everyone who'd lived in this city long enough knew it. The Alderman, 18 floors of pre-war limestone on Michigan Avenue, scaffolding on the exterior that had become such a permanent fixture people had stopped seeing it as temporary. The kind of building that existed in a legal gray zone between what it had been and what someone intended it to become, which made it, she understood now, an ideal location for a man who had spent 20 years operating in exactly that space. Dante didn't want her to go. He said it, once, clearly, without theatrics, while Leo was driving and his hand was still pressed against his ribs. There are other ways to do this. Name one that works tonight, Elena said. He couldn't. They both knew he couldn't. The voice on the phone, the man whose name was at the bottom of the third page, had made it explicit without making it a threat, which was more frightening than a threat. He had said her name. He had said he was reasonable. He had said she already knew who he was. All 3 of those things were true, and all 3 of them meant he was not afraid of her. And a man in his position who is not afraid of you is either confident he can control the outcome or confident he can survive it, and neither possibility was comfortable. The wound, she said to Dante, is not your concern. You're bleeding through your jacket. Leo will. Leo is driving. She looked at him directly. If you come into that building in the condition you're in right now, you will be a liability before the first floor. Cannot be worried about you and present at the same time. She paused. I need to be entirely present. He looked at her for a long moment. Car moved under them. There's a doctor, he said finally. 20 minutes from here, Leo knows. Go there first. And you? She looked at the notebook. She looked at the phone in her other hand, at the unknown number still on the screen. I go in with the audio running, she said. You hear everything. You position outside with however many people you can pull in the next 90 minutes. She met his eyes. And this time you don't wait 17 minutes. He held her gaze. She could feel him working through all the versions of what could go wrong, which was what people did when they cared about outcomes they couldn't fully control. The moment it goes wrong, he said. The moment, she confirmed. Leo made a turn without being asked. She went in alone at 9:17 in the evening. Scaffolding on the exterior had a service entrance at street level that had been left with its padlock cut recently, cleanly, a message that said, "We expected you and we are not concerned about you." She pushed through into a service corridor that smelled like plaster and standing water and the particular staleness of a building that had been sealed too long. The elevator was not running. The stairs were. She climbed to the 14th floor because the voice had said 14, and she climbed it in the dark with her hand on a railing that was solid and cold and had probably been touched by 1,000 people who had no idea their hotel was going to become this. She counted the floors because counting was something concrete she could do while the rest of her was managing everything that wasn't concrete. 12, 13, 14. The door to the 14th floor opened into a wide corridor with emergency lighting at each end, battery-powered strips along the baseboards, casting everything in a low blue-white that made the carpet look gray and the walls look like water. A grand hotel in its bones, the kind with wide doorways and crown molding, currently stripped to its structure with wiring exposed in places and plasterboard stacked against the walls. At the far end, one room with light under the door, not emergency lighting warmer, actual electric, coming from inside. She walked to it and pushed it open. The room had been a suite once and still had the dimensional memory of what it was: high ceilings, a wall of windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, the scaffolding outside the glass, making the city beyond. It looked caged. Someone had brought in a portable lamp and a table and 2 chairs, and the effect was somewhere between a business meeting and an interrogation, which she suspected was intentional. The man sitting in one of the chairs was 71 years old. She knew that because she had looked at his name on the 3rd page, and she had sat with it for the 90 minutes while Leo drove Dante to the doctor, and she had opened her phone and searched it with the focused precision of someone who needed facts and not interpretations. And she had found him. Congressman Harold Mercer, 18 years in federal office, Judiciary Committee, oversight, the kind of career that looked, from the outside, like a sustained commitment to institutional integrity, and looked from the inside, from where she was standing, now like a sustained commitment to being the person who controlled what institutional integrity meant. He looked like a congressman. That was the first thing. He had the face that the position manufactured: avuncular, slightly tired, the kind of face that gave press conferences and shook hands and appeared in photographs alongside other people in expensive rooms. He was wearing a dark overcoat that he hadn't taken off, which meant he didn't intend to be here long. He looked at Elena the way people look at someone they've been waiting for, not impatiently, just with the attention of a man who is ready. "Sit down," he said. She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway with the notebook in her coat and the audio device running against her sternum and the full weight of what she was looking at arriving in her bones. You were in my father's life before the architect existed, she said. Mercer looked at her. He nodded once, the way people nod when they're acknowledging a correct answer, rather than agreeing with something. Victor and I knew each other for a long time, he said. Before the network. Before any of it. He was, genuinely, one of the most intelligent men I've ever known. He said it without performance. I recruited him. I gave him the framework. The concept of redirecting criminal capital into legitimate infrastructure that was mine. Victor built the mechanism that made it operational. You're the architect, Elena said. Not my father. Your father and I built it together, Mercer said. Over time, the distinction between architect and builder becomes semantic. My father tried to expose it. Your father experienced a crisis of conscience in his 50s, which is not uncommon in men who have spent their careers in morally ambiguous spaces. Mercer's voice was not unkind. That was the worst part of it. It was not unkind. He came to me first. He told me what he intended to do. I told him what the consequences would be. He paused. I did not tell Raphael to do what he did. I want to be precise about that. I gave Victor a choice, and Victor chose not to believe I was serious, and Raphael made an independent decision that I found regrettable. The window scaffolding creaked outside. Wind off the lake, pushing against the metal framework. Regrettable, Elena said. Yes, my father. He held her gaze. I am sorry for that. I'm telling you that as a plain fact, not to manage you. Victor's death was not part of any plan I authorized. She stood with that for a moment. The strange thing about being told the truth by someone who has done an enormous wrong is that the truth doesn't make the wrong smaller, it just makes the space around it larger and more detailed. What do you want from me? She said. The notebook, he said. And an agreement. An agreement. You walk away from this. Your mother, your uncle, everyone connected to you, he goes untouched. The evidence your father compiled disappears. Raphael is handled. He overstepped significantly, and there are consequences for that which don't require your involvement. He folded his hands on the table. You rebuild your life. You have resources to do that well. And none of this, none of what Victor built, none of what I built on top of it needs to surface. And if I don't agree, he looked at her steadily. Then the situation becomes complicated in ways that are bad for everyone, including you. She looked at him. She thought about her father's handwriting. She thought about the columns of numbers that she now understood were not a map of Raphael's crimes, but a map of Mercer's the deeper network, the one that Victor had built from Mercer's blueprint, and then spent 2 years trying to dismantle and died before he could. You've been doing this for 30 years, she said. Building legitimate infrastructure from illegitimate capital? Yes. He said it without flinching. Roads, housing, medical facilities in underserved neighborhoods. Can give you a list if you'd like. That's not a justification. No, he agreed. It's a context. It's the same justification my father used, she said, before he understood what it actually was. Something moved in Mercer's face. She had struck something real there, not remorse, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has heard his own argument reflected back at him from an unexpected angle. The notebook, he said again. She reached into her coat. She put the notebook on the table between them. Mercer looked at it. He reached for it. She put her hand flat on top of it. There are 4 copies, she said. Digital. Already distributed. 1 in a safety deposit box in Evanston in my mother's name. 1 with a contact I won't identify. 1 transmitted to a journalist at the Tribune, who received it 2 hours ago and doesn't yet know what she has but will by morning. She watched his face. And 1 with the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, attached to an anonymous submission. That includes documentation of the federal transfer order that moved Marco Vera this afternoon, an order that traces back to your office. The room was very quiet. Mercer's hand stopped moving toward the notebook. The original, Elena said, is the last thing I have that you want. and I will give it to you right now if you'd like to add it to the others. She held his gaze. But I think you understand that it doesn't matter anymore. Mercer sat back in his chair. He looked at the notebook under her hand. He looked at her face. For the first time since she'd walked through the door, he looked like a man his age. Your father taught you to be thorough, he said. My father taught me to count things, she said. I learned thorough on my own. Outside the scaffolding, she heard movement, not wind weight, distributed across the metal framework in the specific way that several people moving carefully distribute weight. Dante's people, in position, which meant Dante was somewhere below or adjacent. Bleeding through a field dressing Leo had improvised, refusing to wait in a car. Mercer heard it too. His eyes moved to the window. He was still, but the stillness had changed quality. How many people know I'm in this room? He said. Enough, Elena said. He looked at his hands on the table. He turned them over once, like he was checking something, and then placed them flat. The gesture of a man who has made a final calculation and arrived at its end. Raphael, he said. Will be arrested by morning, Elena said. The evidence my father compiled covers his activity in detail. He'll cooperate in exchange for reduced exposure. He'll give you up to do it. She paused. You already know that? Yes. Which is why you called me directly instead of sending him. He looked at her. Something in his face, not quite admiration, but its structural cousin. The acknowledgement of a move well made. What do you want? He said. Not what you've already done. I understand what you've done. What do you want from this conversation? She had thought about this on the stairs. She had thought about it in the car, and during the 90 minutes, with her phone and during the walk through this building. She had thought about what her father would have wanted and what that was worth. And where the line was between honoring someone and using them as cover for your own choices. I want you to make a statement, she said. Not a plea, not a cooperation agreement, a statement, under oath, about the network, about its origins, about the 30 years of decisions that built it. She kept her voice level, not because it undoes anything, because the families who were extorted, the people who were leveraged, the neighborhoods that were developed with money that had blood on it before it became brick and mortar, they deserve to know the shape of what was done, even if they can't undo it either. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. And if I refuse then, the Tribune runs what it has tomorrow morning without context. And the U.S. Attorney's Office opens an investigation without cooperation, and you spend whatever time you have left fighting instead of accounting. She met his eyes. I think you're tired of fighting. I think you've been tired of it for a long time. He looked at the window, at the scaffolding, at the city beyond it, which was just the city, enormous and ordinary, and completely indifferent to what happened in this room. Victor, he said slowly, used to say that the difference between a criminal and a reformer was timing. He looked back at her. He was wrong. The difference is whether you can live with the accounting. Can you? Elena asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the notebook under her hand. He looked at his own hands flat on the table. I'll make the statement, he said. Came out of the alderman at 10:41. The scaffolding creaked in the wind off the lake. Michigan Avenue was wet and lit and moving with the ordinary late-night traffic of a city that didn't know what had just happened in a room 14 floors above it. Dante was on the sidewalk. He was not supposed to be on the sidewalk. He was supposed to be in a car, or at minimum not vertical and outdoors, in the wind with a wound in his side. But he was there, hands in his jacket pockets, coat collar up, looking at the building entrance with the focused patience of a man who had decided that whatever it cost him to be standing here was the correct expenditure. He looked at her when she came out. He checked her over in the fast, silent way of someone who has learned to read physical damage at a distance. You're all right, he said. Not a question. Mercer's people are holding him in the suite until your contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office gets there, she said. He's agreed to cooperate. He'll make a formal statement. She paused. He won't fight it. Dante absorbed this, Raphael. Will be picked up tonight. The evidence covers him completely. He nodded. He looked at the building. He looked back at her. Your uncle, he said. Marco is in federal custody. With Mercer cooperating, the coercion angle becomes clear. She thought about her uncle, about the specific texture of his fear when he'd pushed her through the front door. He did something unforgivable. He also did it because someone made him believe he had no other way. She let out a breath. I haven't decided what I think about that yet. You don't have to decide tonight. No, she agreed. I don't. The wind moved down the avenue. She pulled her coat tighter. She was still wearing the gray sweater from that morning, from what felt like a different era, though it had only been hours. Your side, she said. 3 ribs, he said. 1 cracked, 2 bruised. Leo's doctor has strong opinions about what I should currently be doing, none of which involves standing on Michigan Avenue. Then why are you standing on Michigan Avenue? He looked at her. Something in his face, quieter than anything she'd seen there. The way things are quiet after the machinery has stopped. Because I wasn't going to wait in a car, he said. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the foyer of the Valerio estate 24 hours ago, and the man behind the desk who had looked at her with that careful, unclassifiable expression, and the contract torn in half on the desk surface. She thought about all the ways a 24-hour period could expand to contain what this one had. My father trusted you, she said. Yes, he was right to. Dante's jaw moved. He looked away briefly down the avenue at the wet street reflecting the lights. When he looked back, his face had the quality of something that had been holding a significant weight for a long time and was not quite ready to set it down. Victor died because I didn't move fast enough, he said. I should have. He died because Harold Mercer built something that required people to die to sustain it, and Raphael Orsini decided to be the instrument of that. She said it carefully, not cruelly. You were not the instrument. I should have protected him. You tried. She met his eyes. And then you spent 8 years protecting us without telling us. My mother. Me, she paused. That counts. He didn't argue, which was its own kind of answer. Car pulled up Leo, reliable as architecture. The door opened. She looked at the building one more time. Sleep. At the scaffolding, covering the limestone, the renovation that had never happened, the long suspension between what a thing had been and what it was going to become. She got in the car. 3 weeks passed. They passed the way the weeks after significant events do, not slowly, not quickly, but with the texture of time that is actively being used rather than waited through. Marco Vera was arraigned on conspiracy and fraud charges. His attorney argued coercion, and with Mercer's statement on record and the documented evidence of the debt inflation, the argument had enough substance to negotiate with. He would serve time. How much was still being determined. Elena went to see him once, in the holding facility, and they sat across a table from each other, and she looked at him the way she'd looked at him the night he pushed her through the front door, except this time she had the full picture, and it didn't make what he'd done smaller, but it gave it a shape she could, eventually, someday, consider forgiving. She hadn't yet. She told him that. He said, I know. She said, I'll come back. She meant it. Diane Vera was told the truth about her husband in stages over several conversations by Elena. Not everything at once. Nobody gets everything at once. And the woman deserved to process her husband in layers rather than have him reconstructed entirely in a single afternoon. She cried during the second conversation, not the first. During the third, she asked questions, specific and methodical, and Elena answered what she could and said, I don't know when she couldn't. By the fourth conversation, Diane was asking about the safety deposit box. Put it in my name, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He always thought I was stronger than he admitted. Elena didn't say anything. She took her mother's hand. and they sat in the kitchen of the Bridgeport apartment where Elena had grown up, and the radiator did make that sound, and neither of them mentioned it. Harold Mercer made his statement before the U.S. Attorney's Office on a Thursday. It lasted 4 hours and covered 30 years, and the documentation Victor Vera had compiled was introduced as Exhibit 7. The statement was sealed pending investigation, but the investigation had begun, and the people who needed to know its direction knew it. Raphael Orsini was arrested on a Tuesday morning outside an airport he had not quite reached in time. Cooperated fully as predicted. His cooperation was detailed and comprehensive, and, the prosecutor privately noted, delivered with the particular fluency of a man who had been preparing for this conversation for years, and had simply not decided which side of the table he'd be sitting on. The Marchetti Syndicate, what remained of it after 3 weeks of arrests, federal subpoenas, and the quiet defection of its remaining senior figures, collapsed without drama. Structures built on fear tend to, when the fear is suddenly no longer the most frightening thing available. On a Saturday morning, 5 weeks after Elena had been pushed through the front door of the Valerio estate in a borrowed black dress, she stood in the kitchen of that same estate and made coffee and listened to the sound of the city doing its ordinary work beyond the walls. The estate was different now. Not physically, the window in the sitting room had been repaired, and the east wing had been assessed, and its structural damage was minor. Quality of the space had changed in the way spaces change when the purpose they were built for has ended. Quieter. Not empty. Leo was somewhere in the house, moving with his usual anticipatory efficiency, but quieter in the specific way of a place deciding what it was going to be next. Dante came in at 7:40. He was moving more normally than he had been. The ribs were healing. The doctor had confirmed 3 days earlier, though the word healing in the context of cracked bone is relative. He poured coffee and stood at the counter and looked at the garden through the window. Foundation paperwork came through, he said. I saw. She had been the one to file it. The Vera Foundation, she'd chosen the name without asking his opinion, and he hadn't offered one. A non-profit supporting families in legal and financial crisis due to organized crime exposure. The legal framework was clean. The funding was from accounts that Mercer's cooperation had helped legitimize through the investigation's asset disposition process, and the board included 2 lawyers, an accountant, and a social worker Elena had known from her hospital supply work, who had no idea how she'd ended up here, but had said yes immediately. You'll run it, Dante said. Not a question, yes. He nodded. He looked at the garden. I'm dissolving the operational structure, he said. The remaining legitimate properties will transfer to a management company. Leo will run logistics. The rest he stopped. The rest was never what I wanted it to be. She looked at him. He was standing with his coffee and his healing ribs and the morning light on his face, and he looked like a man who had arrived at the end of something and was standing at that end, examining it, not with regret exactly, but with the full attention of someone who intends to understand what they're leaving behind. What did you want it to be? She asked. He thought about it. He gave it the genuine consideration the question deserved, rather than the deflection it would have gotten a month ago. I inherited it, he said finally. I told myself I was managing it, containing it, making it less harmful than it would be under someone else. I told myself that for 20 years. He looked at the coffee cup. Your father told himself something similar. We were both wrong in adjacent ways. You're not the same as Mercer. No, he said it without pride. But I'm also not innocent of the system that made Mercer possible. He looked at her. That's the honest accounting. She thought about what Mercer had said about the difference between a criminal and a reformer being timing. She thought about Victor Vera at a kitchen table with a laptop, working late, carrying something too large for one person. She thought about the ways people constructed justifications for themselves, and the ways those justifications occasionally, cracked open into something that looked like a changed life. Foundation will need legal counsel, she said. Yes. And someone who understands how the money moved, where it came from, how it was structured, what the legitimate version of those structures looks like. She looked at him. Someone who knows the system from the inside. He looked at her for a moment. I'm not a lawyer, he said. No, she agreed. But you know things lawyers don't. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, something quieter than a smile, and more durable. That's a significant pivot, he said. You're not the first person to make one. He looked out the window. At the garden, at the overgrown back corner, where the hedges had been losing the argument with gravity and had now lost it entirely and would need attention in the spring. Your father, he said. My father was complicated, she said. He built something he shouldn't have built, and then tried to undo it and died before he could. He left a thread for someone to follow. She paused. I followed it. That's what threads are for. She reached into the pocket of her coat, which she draped over the chair the night before and hadn't moved. She pulled out the green leather notebook. She set it on the kitchen counter between them. Dante looked at it. Carla made 5 copies, Elena said. The relevant pages are in the hands of everyone who needs them. The investigation has what it needs. She looked at the notebook. This is just a notebook now. It's just something my father gave me when I was 13 and told me to write in. She opened it to the first blank page. She picked up a pen from the counter, a mundane thing, a ballpoint from a cup of pens that Leo kept on the counter for the ordinary administrative purposes of a house. She wrote her name on the page, Elena Vera, the date. Nothing else. She closed it. Dante watched her do it. She could feel his attention the way you feel attention that is complete, not evaluating, just present. You're staying, he said. For now, she said. Because I have work to do here, and because I'm choosing to. She met his eyes. Not because I owe anyone anything. I know the difference, he said. She looked at him. She thought about the first night, the foyer, the torn contract on the desk, the man who had looked at the thing her uncle had brought him and refused it, not because he was merciful, but because he had recognized something, a photograph, a connection, thread he'd been on for 8 years, and had made a decision that cost him nothing that night and everything in the weeks that followed. The contract, she said. The first night. You tore it in half. Yes. You knew who I was before I walked in. I suspected. He set his coffee down. Victor had a photograph of you. Carried it for years. I saw it once in his office, years before he died. When you walked in, he paused. I recognized you. She looked at the notebook on the counter, at her name on the first page in her own handwriting, placed where her father had always intended someone to put something. He thought of everything, she said again. But this time, she wasn't thinking about what he'd missed. Outside, the city was doing what it did, enormous and ordinary, and full of people navigating the gap between what they'd been handed and what they intended to make of it. The garden needed work in the back corner. The foundation paperwork had come through. Marco would be arraigned again in 3 weeks, and she would be there. Her mother had started asking about Victor's safety deposit box, which meant she was ready for the next layer of truth, which meant Elena would sit with her again and answer what she could. There was enough to do. There was more than enough. Picked up her coffee. She looked at the garden through the window. Beside her, Dante stood with his healing ribs and his morning quiet and the weight of 20 years of the wrong system. Finally, at cost, behind him, the sun came through the kitchen window. It was, for the first time in a long time, an ordinary morning. An ordinary, Elena understood, was not a small thing. It was exactly the right size.